Bobby Bukowski. You're the cinematographer for Till, about the murder of Emmett Till and the activism of his mother, Mamie. How well did you know the story before making the film?
I knew the story very well. I grew up in New York City in the late 60s into the 70s. And of course, it was prime time for the struggle. My mother was a lefty Democrat in New York, and I was very aware of her involvement with equality and justice for all. So even as a child, I was, very active with her in demonstrations for racial equality. So it was a story that was close to my heart and something that I knew very well.
And again, from what I understand, this was a very short, prep, because you came onto this project late, leading up to principal shooting. How challenging is that to kind of prep a whole movie that way?
That was pretty wild. I mean, Chinoya called me, 2 weeks from principal photography to see if I could come in and substitute the prior cinematographer. And I was leaving my house in Portland to go to Georgia within hours of the phone call that I had with her. It just meant that the first 6 weeks of the film, including prep, I didn't have a day off. So pretty much worked, something like 35, 40 days straight before I got to breathe, because we were working on weekends, obviously, because I was catching up. So it was harrowing, but she's a very precise director, and she had a shot list put together. But of course, in prep on the weekends, we would go to the locations, and sometimes those would change. And also, the interesting about prep was that we actually, since we were meeting on the weekends, had a time to evaluate what we had shot the previous week. And it's not normal that we usually do that as director and cinematographer. We usually go home and collapse and hope that we will be able to wake up and have another 5-day week. So there was this kind of evaluative period that's not usually baked into a film that was quite helpful.
One thing that distinguishes the film is it's a very dark subject matter, but it's not a dark film in terms of its visual style. There's a lot of color, there's a lot of vibrancy in it. Tell me about that approach and how you and Chinoya came to it.
Yeah, very much so. That the main thing that Chinoya wanted out of this film was a celebration of Blackness. She did not want to see murky shadows. She wanted to literally and figuratively shine a light on the community and shine a light on this very specific injustice. So she just wanted, there it is, and you see it all. The only time we actually had a lot of shadows in the film were when the killers perpetrate the crime, and in that we were more interested in keeping the white folk a little bit anonymous, because we talked about thematically, how can we not represent, let's not even give them the honor of having faces. So keeping them in darkness and using the flashlights to flare into the lens to obscure their faces was quite intentional. It's like, no, these aren't human beings and we shouldn't represent them as human beings. So that was part thematically of quite opposite of how we were representing the Black faces in the film.
And speaking of which, you have Danielle Deadweiler. So much of the film plays on her face, her emotions, her performance. Tell me about shooting her, lighting her. What were some of the approaches there?
Yeah, Danielle, first of all, was the entire inspiration for every inch of lighting and composition in the film. She's so incredible that it's amazing to have to step up in a way to support that magnitude of talent that she has. So she was a driving force in so many ways. We tested rigorously before we shot. We had two-day test day, and we spent many hours with Danielle in front of the camera. We pretty much knew, since it was quite a subjective story, that portraiture was going to be very important in the film and prevalent in our shooting the film. So I really wanted to investigate and really dissect her face. And what we mostly learned in prep was that we really needed to get eye light. We needed to get those dark eyes to shine. So a lot of what the gaffer, Justin Davis, and I did together was to assure that we had light in her eyes at all times. I found out like lighting black skin, and when we say black skin, it's like when we say white skin. There's such a range of tonality in black skin, and Danielle is quite dark. So I worked very closely with the makeup designer to keep a sheen on her face, so that we found that by using big, soft sources, reflective sources, more bounces, that it was able to, that sheen was able to pick up the light, and as opposed to incident light, incident direct light, we hardly ever used on her.
And the film is very, it's very important. And I know it's very important to Chenoya not to show the violence against Emmett, but to show sort of the aftermath. What was it like shooting that scene where Mimi sees him in the morgue for the first time, and how emotional is something like that, or the whole film to shoot?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about shooting a scene like that in the morgue, we cleared the room out. It was just me and my dolly grip, and the mics were planted, and it was, the first take was what we were going to bank on because she was ready to go. Knowing that Danielle had a 12-year-old son at the time she was shooting added extra pathos to the scene, because you could imagine what she was imagining as she was looking at the body of that boy. I am quite surprised, because I operated the camera as well. I am quite surprised in a lot of things that the camera is not shaking, because normally I was racked with sobs shooting this film. If you see Danielle crying in front of the camera, you could bet that behind the camera, I'm in tears as well. You're 4 feet from a person's face, a human being that's pouring her heart out and suffering, and there's no way not to be involved with that. So again, I think that added a dimension to the film too, that the communication that Danielle and I had was such that we were feeling very much the same thing at the same time. The production smartly hired a set therapist, and when people were really besides themselves, which was often, we would take breaks and we would just gather as a group and just talk. We were in Georgia. It was a mixed race crew. Everybody's coming from very separate experiences in their relationship to racism. So we had those talks. And again, those were part of the film, I think, too. It's in the fabric of the film.
And the film has two primary settings in terms of Chicago and Mississippi. Did you bring something different to the different locations to kind of evoke Chicago and Mississippi differently?
Yeah, I mean, the community in Chicago, and it opens the film, is quite vibrant, and quite open and free. It's where Emmett grew up, and we wanted to represent it in a warm, open, loving, tender way, because when he goes to the South, it's a much more arch place to exist. There's a natural in the location where we were shooting out in the fields. There's usually a natural kind of diffusion just from the humidity in the air. So there's a little bit of dirtiness in the air, more or less. Less color in those scenes. The vibrancy goes down. It's a more white controlled location. So bringing those kind of strictures of the white people being lording over the Black people, we took some of the color away.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your work on the film, and thank you so much for making the film, and thank you so much for talking with me about it.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it. Nice to meet you.